Have you ever imagined reaching old age, losing the great love of your life, and instead of giving up, making the craziest and bravest decision of your entire life? After losing her husband at 68, she did something no one in her family expected. She sold almost everything, bought an old bus, and disappeared into the backlands. Months later, when they finally discovered where she was, no one believed what they saw with their own eyes. What you are about to discover may surprise you, not only because of what she did, but because of the profound reason that pushed this woman onto the road, just when the whole world was saying it was time to retire from her dreams. For decades, her life seemed to follow the perfect script of routine: a long marriage, a simple home, grown children, grandchildren arriving, those quiet afternoons when the loudest noise was the kettle whistling. She was always seen as the loving grandmother, the devoted wife, the tranquil elderly woman who had already lived what she had to live, until suddenly the phone rings, the news arrives, and everything collapses. Her husband, her companion for over 40 years, is not coming back. The empty chair at the table begins to scream a painful silence. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt like the ground disappeared beneath your feet when someone you loved was simply no longer there? In the first few days, grief was a mixture of silent tears and lost gazes around the house. His clothes were still in the closet. His scent still lingered in the air. Memories seemed to wander down the hallway. The family, worried, approached with the best of intentions. "Now is the time to rest, to take care of yourself," they said. Phrases like, "At your age, the best thing is to stay quietly at home," began to become routine. Without realizing it, everyone treated that vibrant woman, full of history, as someone who should simply wait for time to pass. And perhaps it is here that one of the most powerful stories of new beginnings in old age that you will hear today begins. Stay with me until the end, because it was there, in the midst of grief, that something began to bother her. Between visits, between pieces of advice, she began to realize that no one asked what she wanted. They asked if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if she needed medication, but no one asked, "And now, what are your dreams?" As if elderly people could no longer have plans, as if old age were just a long corridor leading to the end. And yet inside her, something insisted on saying that life hadn't ended, that there was still a path, perhaps different, perhaps crazy, but profoundly true. One day, returning from the market, with light bags and a heavy heart, she passed by a vacant lot and saw something that seemed as abandoned as she felt inside. An old, rusty, forgotten bus, parked for years under the harsh sun of the backlands. The faded paint, the dirty windows, the flat tires. But something about that bus caught her attention in an almost inexplicable way. She stopped. She looked for a few seconds longer than she should have, and an old memory resurfaced. When she was young, she dreamed of traveling through the countryside, getting to know small towns, hearing stories from strangers, seeing the sunset from different places. But, as happens to so many people, life piled up responsibilities, bills, children, fears, and that dream was pushed to the back of the drawer. At that moment, standing before that old, forgotten bus, she saw more than just a vehicle. It was a chance for a turning point, the possibility of transforming grief into movement, pain into a journey, loneliness into encounters. The idea seemed absurd as quickly as it seemed irresistible. What if I bought this bus, she thought. What if I transformed this into my new home, my new beginning? Her heart raced, her hands trembled, but for the first time since the loss, she felt something very much like life. Have you ever had an idea that seemed crazy but that, deep down, also seemed like your only way to breathe again? What followed that question wasn't simple, it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't something the family understood at first. After all, why would a woman who had always been afraid to travel alone decide to hit the road, in an old bus, through the backlands, precisely at the stage of life when everyone expects her to stay quiet, taking medication and watching television? What happens in the mind and heart of an elderly woman who decides not to accept the role of poor thing and resolves to start over from scratch no matter the cost? What you're about to see is the journey of this woman who transformed an abandoned bus into a symbol of new beginnings, overcoming challenges and courage in old age, and how, months later, when they finally discovered where she was. No one escaped unscathed from this story. Before that encounter with the old bus, Donna Helena's story seemed like that of so many people we know. She woke up early every day, made coffee, always set the table the same way, knew exactly when her husband would arrive, the television channel he liked, his favorite weekend food. 40-odd years of marriage had created a comfortable, almost automatic routine in which each knew their role. She took care of the house, the family, the invisible details. He drove, handled the paperwork, went to the bank, talked to the mechanic, decided on the route on the road. On the outside, everything seemed perfectly organized. On the inside, she didn't even realize how much she had handed the steering wheel of her own life to him. Over time, the family grew, the children left home, built their own stories, and the couple's house became increasingly silent. The curious thing is that, even with this silence, Helena never saw herself as unhappy. She had a sense of accomplishment. She raised, cared for, and supported them. Her mentality was very similar to that of many elderly people. I've lived what I had to live. But there was a hidden truth there, concealed in the background of the routine. On some nights, when her husband was already asleep, she would find herself looking out the window, imagining what it would be like to take to the road without a destination, guided only by curiosity. These thoughts came and went quickly, almost like a secret she pretended not to hear. The big issue is that, while everything seemed stable, these small inner questions didn't gain traction. Life went on in a kind of autopilot mode, where there were no major decisions to make, only repetitions. He drove, she followed. He planned, she adjusted the details. This type of dynamic is common in many long marriages, but it has a silent impact. The person gradually forgets that they too can choose a different path. And if you stop to think about it, perhaps you know someone like that, who faded behind the roles of wife, mother, grandmother, and left their own dreams locked away somewhere in the past. If this somehow resonates with your reality, write in the comments a word that summarizes this feeling of living on autopilot. Helena's story shows a very strong transformation of mindset. When she loses her husband, it's not just the person who leaves. The navigator of her life also leaves, the one who decided the destination, the path, the speed. Suddenly she finds herself facing something that wasn't in the script. For the first time, she's forced to look at her own internal map. Loneliness brings to light old questions that were always postponed. What dreams were truly hers? What choices would she have made if she hadn't always been following someone else? And most importantly, what to do with the years that still remained ahead? This is the part of the journey where many people give up. The grief, the pain, the fear of making mistakes later on, all of this weighs heavily. But in some cases, it is precisely this shock that generates new courage. It's as if life is saying, now it's just you and you. What are we going to do with this? And it is at this point that the decision to look at an abandoned bus and see a new beginning there ceases to be just madness and becomes a profound act of rediscovering oneself. If this makes sense to you, comment with whatever phrase comes from the heart, something like, "It makes sense to me," just to show that this reflection also touches you in some way, and to continue along on this journey as Donna Helena's story begins to change direction. The day she lost her husband didn't begin any differently than any other. She woke up early, put the water on the stove, set the table for two, as she had done for decades. His cup was in its usual place, his favorite plate, the automatic habit of saying aloud, "The coffee's ready." But that morning, the answer didn't come. In a few hours, everything turned into a whirlwind of ringing phones, hospital visits, news too fast for an aging heart. When it finally sank in, it was as if someone had ripped away not only his presence, but also the ground on which their lives stood. From then on, the house ceased to be a home and became a backdrop of memories. In the following days, the silence took on a weight. The armchair where he liked to sit seemed to stare at her. The clothes remained hanging in the closet, carefully folded, as if at some point he would push open the door, crack a joke, and order dinner. At night, Helena walked slowly down the hallway, talking to herself with his photo on the dresser, asking in a low voice, "And now, what do I do?" She could barely sleep, waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that she had heard the gate open. This stage of the journey is made up of small, invisible ruptures, the things that no one sees behind the scenes of grief, but which destroy the emotional state little by little. It is here that many people hit rock bottom, that moment when even getting out of bed seems like a gigantic task. While she tried to understand this new reality, the world around her continued with its own logic. Family, children, neighbors, everyone appeared with ready-made advice. Now it's time to rest, right? At your age, the best thing is to stay quietly at home. Don't think about nonsense. Time heals everything. Phrases that, on the surface, seem like care, but which carry a hidden truth. No one stopped to ask what she felt, what she wanted, what decisions she still wanted to make about her own life. Instead, they pushed Helena into the role of a fragile, almost decorative figure, as if the impact of that loss had reduced her existence to a silent weight. If this reminds you of someone, or even yourself at some point, write something like, "I recognize this pain," in the comments, just to show that this type of story is not isolated. Now I want to delve even deeper into this experience, because there's something almost no one talks about, the feeling of invisibility. Inside, Helena still saw herself as a living woman, full of memories, of learning, of a desire to be useful, to keep moving forward. Outside, she was treated as someone at the end of the line, as if dreams had an expiration date. The mentality of the people around her was clear. After such a loss, especially in old age, the expectation is simply to survive the days, not to venture into new journeys. But the truth is that the heart doesn't follow that script. Amidst the tears, a different kind of restlessness began to grow, almost imperceptible, but very powerful. This unease arose when she opened the closet and saw his shirt still there, ready to be worn. When she passed by the garage and stared at the empty space of the car, remembering how many postponed trips, how many promises left for someday, it was as if every object in the house silently repeated a question. And you? What are you going to do with the time you have left? What if time didn't take away dreams, but only waited for the right moment to fulfill them? Comment below, in one sentence, which of your dreams is still being kept safe, even if the world thinks it's too late. This helps us understand how this story, in one way or another, resonates with the journey of many people who are also trying to get back on their feet after a great loss. One day, after another almost entire sleepless night, Helena decided to go to the market just to try and clear her mind. She grabbed her bag, closed the door slowly, feeling the echo of silence throughout the house, and began walking down the same street as always. But that morning, something different caught her attention. On the other side of the sidewalk, in a somewhat forgotten lot, there was an old rusty bus parked there, its paint peeling and its windows dusty. She had passed by there before, but it was as if, precisely on that day, that bus had gained shape, color, meaning. It was almost a silent shock, an internal impact, as if someone had turned on a small light in a dark room inside her. Helena stopped. She stood there, a few seconds longer than anyone would consider normal, staring at that worn-out bus, the flat tires, the stained bodywork, the scratched windows. From the outside, everything said, "End of the line." But the more she looked, the more old memories began to resurface. Suddenly, it wasn't just an abandoned vehicle in some random lot. It was an invitation, a kind of mirror of her own journey, stopped, forgotten, but still structurally sound enough to run again. And here comes the curious part of this story. Her mind, which had been mired in sadness, began to pull up memories from decades ago, as if rewinding a forgotten tape. When she was young, before getting married, Helena had an almost secret dream of exploring the countryside, visiting small towns, talking to simple people, seeing the sky from different places. She imagined long road trips, cheap inns, hand-scribbled maps. But time passed, bills arrived, children, fear, lack of money, the famous excuse of, "we'll do it later." The hidden truth is that this later never came. And now there, in front of a rusty bus, life seemed to throw in her face all the time she postponed her own desires to prioritize the needs of others. This silent revelation hurt, but it also brought something new, a spark of possibility. It's interesting how, at certain moments, a simple object can become the trigger for a profound transformation. That bus was that for her. As she stared at its worn-out metal, Helena began to imagine scenarios she hadn't considered in many years. She thought about waking up in different places, transforming the entire interior into a small home on wheels, filling the walls with photos, maps, and souvenirs from each stop. She thought about the freedom to decide her own path, to choose when to go, when to stay, to create a journey that finally reflected her personality. Without realizing it, she was rehearsing new decisions right there in the middle of the street with her still empty shopping bag in her hand. Now I want to delve deeper into what this moment represents, because it wasn't just a crazy impulse from a sad old woman. It was the first time in a long time that Helena found herself in the role of protagonist of her own story. Instead of being carried away by events, she began to consider steering the course of her own life. The pain was still there. The grief hadn't disappeared, but mixed with all of that, a dangerous and liberating thought emerged. What if there's still time? It was there, in front of a rusty bus, that she had the craziest, and deep down, the truest idea of her entire existence. That day, Helena returned from the market with her head fuller than the shopping bags. The old bus wouldn't leave her mind. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, she began to do calculations in an old notebook, adding up small savings, remembering the value of the family car, looking around at the furniture, at the objects that had more history than utility. At first, it seemed like a daydream, almost a fantasy of someone trying to escape pain. But as the days passed, that image of herself driving down the road, living inside the bus, experiencing a new journey, ceased to be just imagination and began to become a plan. And that's where the story changes tone. Because dreaming is easy, making concrete decisions is difficult. Silently, Helena began to get rid of things. She sold old items, put money in separate envelopes, and discreetly asked how much they could pay for the car. Each object that left the house seemed to make room for something new inside. It wasn't just an exchange of material goods. It was a transformation of mindset. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what was best for everyone else, but about what was vital for her own soul. Until the moment came when she could no longer hide it. She gathered her children in the living room and said, with a calmness that surprised even herself, that she had decided to buy that bus. The reaction was exactly what you'd imagine. Shock, concern, almost indignation. One of them said it was something someone in denial would do, trying to escape grief. Another said it was dangerous, that she was too old to get involved in such adventures, that kind of life was for young people. Words like risk, irresponsibility, and fear were thrown around. Behind the scenes of that conversation, what was at stake wasn't just the purchase of an old car. It was the breaking of a role they expected her to silently accept, that of a fragile, predictable woman, always at her family's disposal. Now I want to delve even deeper into this point, because it's here that her courage shines through in full force. While listening to everything, Helena remained silent for a few minutes, feeling that mixture of guilt and anger. Then she took a deep breath and said, with a firmness she had never used before, not even with her own children, "You think I'll die if I'm alone on the road. I think I'll die if I stay here." This sentence fell on the room like a revelation. For the first time, she put into words the truth that had been stuck inside. The greatest danger wasn't the world outside. It was withering away inside, living a life that no longer made sense. This statement didn't erase anyone's fear, but it inaugurated a different kind of perspective. On her, she was no longer just a frail widow. She was a woman, in all her power, claiming the right to choose how she wanted to live the time she still had. From that point on, the decision was made. Even without the unanimous approval of her family, Helena went ahead with her plan to buy the bus. It wasn't a reckless gesture. It was an act of emotional survival. And what if the courage to start over, even in old age, was the true secret to staying alive inside? When she finally got her hands on the bus's documents, Helena felt a chill in her stomach that mixed fear and excitement. The old vehicle, which had previously seemed like nothing but scrap metal, was now officially part of her life. Entering through the narrow door for the first time as its owner, she faced the worn floor, the torn seats, the smell of old dust. Anyone else would only see problems. She, however, saw a sketch of a home, of freedom, of a new story. It was the beginning of a concrete transformation, not only of the bus, but of her own identity. From then on, every detail would be the result of her decisions, and that, in itself, was revolutionary. Without any mechanical knowledge, Helena did what many people do today when they need to learn something from scratch. She started researching. She took her old cell phone, went online, and spent hours watching videos about engine repair, basic electrical systems, thermal insulation, and painting. She learned words she had never heard before, discovered the difference between types of paint, and understood how the electrical system of a large vehicle worked. She wrote everything down in a notebook, as if she were back in school, only now the main subject was starting over. This change in mindset is powerful. She stopped seeing herself as incapable because of her age and began to see herself as a learner on a new journey. Realizing she needed help, she sought out a younger mechanic in the area, known for enjoying challenges. She arrived shyly, told her story, and showed him the bus. He chuckled slightly, thinking the idea crazy, but hearing the firmness in her voice, he decided to join the project. Behind the scenes of this unlikely partnership, something beautiful was happening. While he taught her technical terms, she taught him about patience, persistence, and not giving up just because something seems too old. Over time, mutual respect grew. The impact of this renovation went beyond the bodywork. It was a meeting of generations, building a new possibility together. As the weeks passed, the bus came to life. The engine was serviced, the windows that had barely opened before now let the wind in, and the floor was leveled to become the base of a small home. Helena chose to remove almost all the seats, leaving only a few, and began to imagine where the bed, the stove, and a small wardrobe would go. She painted the interior walls a light color, which gave a sense of spaciousness, and on one side, she decided to write a phrase that summarized her transformation, something like, "There's still time." Each brushstroke was a silent declaration that she wasn't ready to accept the end, that she was, in fact, willing to live a new phase with courage. Separating what to take into the bus was perhaps one of the most profound parts of the whole process. Facing the wardrobe and the cupboards in the house, Helena had to choose the essentials: a few clothes, important photos, a blanket her husband liked, some books, simple kitchen utensils. By leaving behind so many accumulated objects, she realized how much we carry unnecessarily, including emotions, guilt, social roles that no longer make sense. Now I want to delve even deeper into this. As the bus became habitable, she also felt lighter, as if, with each donated box, she opened up internal space for new feelings, new memories, new revelations about who she really was without the label of suffering widow. The most beautiful thing is that, at this point in the Biu story, many people who previously called it madness began, silently, to root for her. Curious neighbors would stop by to see the renovation. One offered a curtain, another a piece of wood. Someone gave her a small plant to put in the window. The children, even though still insecure, began to notice the different sparkle in their mother's eyes. It wasn't escapism. It was rebuilding. The day of departure arrived without warning. There was no party, no official farewell. Helena woke up early, as always, but this time, she didn't set the table for two. Instead, she made a strong coffee, took one last walk through the rooms of the house, ran her hand along the walls, as if thanking and saying goodbye at the same time. She grabbed her small suitcase with the essentials, locked the door slowly, and walked towards the bus, which now carried not only fresh paint and simple furniture, but the weight and lightness of a new beginning. As she sat in the driver's seat, her hands trembled, turning. The key wasn't just starting an engine. It was activating a new version of herself. When the engine's roar finally filled the silence, her heart raced along with it. She took a deep breath, engaged the gear, and began to slowly leave the street where she had lived for so many years. The first few blocks were almost a test of courage. Each corner seemed like a question. Each curious glance from the windows seemed like a judgment. But as she left the city behind and the dirt road began, something inside her began to quiet down. The swaying of the bus, the sound of the pebbles under the tires, the wind entering through the open window, all of this created a feeling of freedom she had never experienced. Still, the transformation didn't erase the fear. The empty road also instilled a certain dread, an echo of loneliness that made her mind question, did I bite off more than I could chew? The first few days were a mix of enchantment and testing of limits. There were moments when she stopped, the bus just to contemplate the orange sunset cutting across the horizon, moved by her own courage. But there was also a real challenge, a flat tire in the middle of nowhere, forcing Helena to face the vulnerability of being alone. She remembered the videos she had watched, picked up the tools with trembling hands, and tried to follow the step-by-step instructions. When she realized she couldn't manage alone, she took a deep breath and waited for help. And the help came from where she least expected it, a simple resident of a small house by the roadside who, noticing the stopped bus, appeared offering not only knowledge, but also hot coffee and good conversation. That's when the journey begins to take on an even more human tone. In a small village, the local mechanic, upon hearing her story, decided not to charge for the repairs, saying that the payment would be seeing her continue her journey. Curious children knocked on the bus door to find out what it was like inside, asked questions, and laughed loudly when she recounted that this was now the home on wheels of an adventurous grandmother. At each stop, Helena received something unexpected, a plate of food, advice, a blessing, a look of admiration. Behind the hardships, what was revealed was the impact of her choices on the mindset of the people around her. The story of this elderly woman who decided not to accept the traditional script of old age spread by word of mouth. Now, I want to delve deeper into the meaning of this. She set out in search of herself, trying to survive grief and emptiness, but along the way, she began to realize that something much bigger was happening. Her presence, her boldness, her open vulnerability touched those she met on the road. People who had given up on dreaming began to ask themselves again, what if there's still time for me too? The journey, which seemed individual, took on collective contours, almost as if each kilometer traveled opened up space for new stories of new beginnings. After a few days on the road, with quick stops and nights where the sound of rain on the bus roof lulled her to sleep, Helena arrived at a small village lost in the middle of the backlands. It was a simple place, with dirt roads, low houses, and a silence so constant it seemed to be part of the landscape. She stopped the bus near a square with few trees and decided to stay there for a while, more by intuition than by any planning. She walked slowly, observing the people, and something began to catch her attention. Many faces marked by time, many elderly people sitting in chairs on the sidewalk, watching the almost non-existent movement. She struck up a conversation with a woman who seemed to be about her age. Within minutes, stories of loss surfaced, of children who had moved away, of husbands who were no longer there, of days that always dragged on the same way. The hidden truth was that the village was full of people who were alive on the outside, but almost giving up on the inside. And it was in this setting that Helena realized the silent impact of her own journey. When she humbly recounted that she lived alone in a bus and had decided to hit the road after becoming a widow, the eyes of the other elderly people shone with a mixture of surprise and admiration. It wasn't the feat of traveling, but the courage of having made a choice different from what was expected. Gradually, the bus ceased to be merely a refuge on wheels for a courageous, elderly woman and became a meeting point. Curious children knocked on the door, but mainly older people began to appear, asking to see inside, asking what it was like to sleep there, what it was like to cook in that small space, what it was like to wake up each day in a new place. Helena, who previously saw the vehicle only as a mobile home to escape loneliness, began to see another possibility, transforming that space into a place of listening, of sharing, almost an open living room for anyone who wanted to talk. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because it is here that a new purpose is born, much greater than the initial idea of simply surviving grief. She gathered some books she had brought, arranged a corner with simple chairs, and began inviting the residents for afternoon chats. There, between freshly brewed coffee and old stories, the elderly of that village began to talk about shelved dreams. One wanted to start planting in the garden again. Another wanted to learn how to use a cell phone to see photos of his grandchildren. Yet another spoke with a sparkle in his eyes about a craft he had done in his youth and had abandoned. Helena didn't offer ready-made answers. She didn't give motivational speeches. She simply recounted her own journey of pain and new beginnings, showing by example that there is no right age to turn the key in one's life. That is true emotional authority. Not that of someone who has studied the subject, but that of someone who has bled, fallen, and decided to get up again. Over time, the bus took on the appearance of a project, not just a home. She pasted inspirational quotes on the walls, hung drawings made by the village children, and left notebooks and pens for anyone who wanted to write down memories, recipes, and plans. She began visiting the homes of some more isolated elderly people, bringing not only companionship, but also a gentle provocation. What do you still have time to do for yourself? The key, transformation that had begun as something internal spread outward, as if each person touched by her story also received permission to desire more, even after so much they had experienced. And if this idea of finding a new purpose on the road moves you, write a simple phrase in the comments, something like, "I still have dreams," just to record that this flame also continues to burn within you, even if the world insists on saying otherwise. The news of that woman who lived on a bus and held conversations with elderly people began to spread much faster than Helena imagined. First, there were some photos taken by curious travelers, then a short text published on a local page telling the story of that grandmother of the road who parked in simple villages and filled her old vehicle with people, laughter, and memories. In a short time, these images reached her family. Her children, who for months had only had superficial news, felt a mixture of relief and concern upon seeing their mother there, among strangers, with a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't appeared in a long time. It was inevitable. They decided to go after her, driven by a mixture of longing, fear, and curiosity about what was actually happening. The journey to that village was silent. In the car, each carried their own thoughts and guilt. Had they judged too quickly? Had they tried so hard to protect that they ended up trying to imprison? Upon arriving at the small square where the bus was parked, what they saw didn't match the image of fragility they had created in their minds. Helena was outside, laughing at something a woman was saying, surrounded by children and the elderly, with a cup of coffee in her hand and an upright, firm, present posture. There was life there, not only in the scene around her, but especially in the way she moved, listened, and embraced. That reunion began even before their first direct glance. When they finally drew closer and she noticed her children, time seemed to slow down. Her eyes filled with tears. Her steps became short, her heart tightened, but not with fear, with emotion. The hug that followed carried all the months of distance, all the unspoken no's, all the attempts at care that had gone wrong. After a few minutes of silence, Helena took a deep breath and, with a choked but firm voice, uttered the phrase that seemed to summarize her entire journey. "I didn't run away from you. I ran away from a life that was no longer mine." In that instant, profound truth was revealed not only to them, but to anyone who has ever felt the need to break free from a routine that slowly kills. Now I want to delve even deeper into this impact, because this wasn't a woman who had rejuvenated in a physical sense. The wrinkles remained, her body still tired, her hair remained gray. What had changed was the meaning of her days. Her mindset had been turned upside down. Instead of waiting for time to pass, she began to choose what to do with the time that remained. Her children, spending a few days with their mother in that village, witnessed firsthand the effect her presence had on the other elderly people. How the conversations helped people who had already given up on dreaming to rediscover simple desires, to plant again, to sow, to learn something new, to call a distant relative. It wasn't empty adventure. It was service. It was dedication. It was love in action. With touched hearts and pride set aside, the family did what had previously seemed unthinkable. Instead of trying to bring her back to her old home, they decided to support the project. One of the sons helped install a small solar panel on the bus, another organized a fundraiser among friends to fix the remaining details, and one of the daughters sewed new curtains to make the interior cozier. Instead of being the end, that reunion became a collective new beginning. From then on, Helena continued traveling, stopping in villages, towns, and forgotten communities, bringing companionship, listening, and inspiration to other elderly people. The difference was that now she knew she was no longer alone. Behind that old engine was a network of affection sustaining every kilometer of the journey. She didn't regain her youth on the calendar, but she found something that many people spend their entire lives without finding, a purpose that makes sense to their own soul. And what if the courage to start over, even after so many losses, was a way to keep the heart young, regardless of age? When the dust settles and we calmly look at everything that happened to Helena, a question begins to echo inside, almost uncomfortably. How many elderly people, at this very moment, are sitting in silence, believing that their lives are already over just because someone, at some point, said that they've given all they had to give? Sometimes it's not even a direct phrase, it's the way they look at them, how they treat them, how decisions are made for them. It's when they start being left out of conversations, decisions, plans. They are pushed into a comfortable but empty corner. And the truth is that many people only realize this when they see a story like Helena's and realize that that feeling of being superfluous is not an exaggeration. It's real, it hurts, and it repeats itself in many homes. Now I want to delve even deeper into this revelation, because it's not just older people who live in this kind of invisible prison. How many of us, much younger, are accepting a meaningless life out of sheer fear of starting over? Fear of leaving behind a suffocating routine? Fear of disappointing family? Fear of being judged for making decisions that deviate from the expected script? The world is full of people old enough to experiment, but with a dead-end mentality, and at the same time, full of elderly people with advanced age and hearts begging, screaming, for a chance to experience something new. The line that separates one from the other is not the number of candles on the cake. It's the courage to embrace one's own journey. When Helena decides to sell what she owns, buy an old bus, and hit the road, she's not denying her age, nor pretending she doesn't feel pain, longing, or weariness. She's simply choosing not to let that be the last word. It's as if she's saying, with each kilometer traveled, I acknowledge everything I've lived through, but I also acknowledge that there are still chapters ahead. This change in mindset is powerful because it breaks with the hidden truth that many people carry, the idea that there's a phase of life where all that's left is to wait. Her example shows the opposite. It shows that it's never too late to start over, even if the new beginning isn't grand in the eyes of the world, but is immense for the heart of the one who lives. And perhaps that's the great message behind this whole story. Age is not a sentence of end. It's a chapter of transformation. Old age doesn't have to be the desert. After the storm, it can be fertile ground for new meanings, new connections, new ways of serving and feeling alive. Starting over doesn't erase what has passed, but gives it new meaning. It doesn't bring back those who are gone, but honors those losses with decisions that make life worthwhile again. And this applies to those who are over 60, over 70, but also to those who are still in the middle of their journey and, even so, already feel that they have stagnated inside. If you've made it this far, it's safe to say this story resonated with you. And that says a lot about the kind of person you are. Someone who values transformation, courage, new beginnings, and doesn't see age as the end. Stories like Helena's aren't just entertainment. They act as a mirror, and sometimes as a little push we didn't even know we needed. So, if it made sense to walk along to the end of this video, it's worth sticking around for the next journeys that will appear here. If this content made you reflect, moved you, or helped you look at your own life with a little more affection, subscribe to the channel. It's not just a button press. It's a way to show that this type of message, which talks about ordinary people experiencing profound things, is worth the time, care, and energy to continue sharing. Each subscription is a clear sign that there is a growing community around this conversation about mindset, difficult decisions, and new beginnings at any stage of life. And to show that you really made it to the end, leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me." It's a simple way of saying I was here, but also of showing that, in some way, this journey resonates with yours. Furthermore, when you like the video, you're helping to keep alive this connection that we've built throughout the story, as if you were silently saying, I feel this too. If it makes sense, go ahead and click like now. in your own way, without pressure, only if it truly resonated with you. And if you want to continue delving into this topic, there's a video right here that complements this subject and further deepens this conversation about courage and new beginnings. Click and continue with me there, because perhaps the next chapter you need to hear is in the very next video.